Let's start with the part the flattering versions skip. The night Jesus was arrested, the men closest to him did not stand their ground. They ran, every single one of them. The Gospel of Mark says it in one blunt line. Everyone deserted him and fled. Peter, the loud one, the one who'd sworn he would die first, denied even knowing him. 3 times, not to a Roman soldier, to a servant girl warming her hands by a fire. And after it was over, after the execution, they didn't regroup into a bold movement. They hid, locked in a room. The text literally says it, for fear. One of them, Thomas, said he wouldn't believe Jesus was alive again unless he could put his fingers in the wounds himself. That's your fearless band of apostles. Cowards, deniers, doubters. Hold on to that, because it's the whole point. Now jump forward. A few weeks, maybe a couple of months. The same terrified men who hid behind a locked door are standing in public. In Jerusalem, the exact city that had just executed their leader, where the same authorities could do the identical thing to them. And they're not keeping their heads down. They're announcing out loud that the man Rome crucified is alive. And over the next 30 years, they scatter across the empire saying it. Until one by one, most of them are killed for refusing to stop. So here's the question this whole video is really about. What happens in that gap? How do you get from a man denying Jesus to a servant girl, to that same man letting Rome kill him rather than take it back? Something is sitting in the middle of that story. Let's walk through how they died. But I'm going to do something most videos on this won't. I'll tell you which of these we can actually stand behind and which ones are just a good story. Because those are not the same thing. Start with the one nobody disputes. James, son of Zebedee. Acts, chapter 12. King Herod killed him with the sword. Around the year 44. It's in the Bible itself, written within living memory. Apart from Judas, who we'll get to, he's the only apostle whose death the New Testament actually describes. Then Peter and Paul, executed in Rome under the Emperor Nero. Our earliest source, a letter written from Rome barely 30 years later, says plainly that both were killed there. It doesn't say how. For the method we lean on slightly later writers. Peter crucified, Paul, a Roman citizen, beheaded. The deaths in Rome are solid ground, taken seriously even by secular historians. The exact method is a step less certain, and I'd rather tell you that. And now the ground gets soft, because everything past those 3, the closer you look, the shakier it gets. Thomas, the doubter, supposedly speared to death in India. There really are millions of Christians in southern India who trace their church to him. But our main written source for it was composed more than a century after he died, and it reads like an adventure novel. Andrew on an X-shaped cross. Bartholomew skinned alive. Matthew, Philip, Simon, James the Less, Thaddeus, beheaded, crucified, clubbed, sawn in half, depending on which ancient list you pick up. And that's the tell. The lists don't agree with each other. Different centuries, different cities, different gruesome deaths for the same man. So when a video tells you, flat out, Bartholomew was flayed alive and then crucified upside down, what it isn't telling you is that we're reading tradition written hundreds of years later, not a report from the scene. Even Peter's famous upside-down cross comes from a book that also has him resurrecting a dried fish. The dying in Rome part is early and solid. The upside-down part is not a courtroom transcript. And Judas doesn't even get one clean ending. One book says he hanged himself. Another says he fell in a field and burst open. Both are in the New Testament. John is the lone exception to all of it. Tradition says he died old in his bed after exile to a prison island. 1 out of 12. Okay, here's where an honest person has to slow down. Because the obvious response is right there, and it's a good one. People die for false beliefs all the time. Every religion has martyrs. Someone being willing to die for a thing does not make the thing true. That is completely correct, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending it isn't. If that were the whole argument, it would be a weak one. But there's a narrower version that's harder to wave off. Most martyrs die for something they were taught, a belief handed to them. These men were in a different position. They were dying for something they claimed to have seen with their own eyes. A person can be sincerely wrong about a belief. It is a stranger thing to keep dying, one after another, for an event you would personally know you'd made up. And you don't have to take the church's word for any of this. Look at what even skeptical historians grant. There's a passage in 1 Corinthians where Paul quotes a creed, a fixed, memorized summary, that he says he received from the people before him. Christ died, was buried, rose, and appeared to Peter, to the 12, and to more than 500 people, most of whom, he writes, are still alive. Meaning, go ask them. Most scholars, including some skeptics, date that creed to within just a few years of the crucifixion. Not centuries, years. Far too early to be a legend that slowly grew. Then notice what the Gospels chose to write down. Their own leaders running, Peter denying, Thomas doubting, women as the first witnesses to the empty tomb, in a culture where a woman's testimony carried little public weight. If you are inventing a hero myth, you do not make your founders cowards and your key witnesses the people nobody would believe. You put in embarrassing details like that only when you're stuck with what actually happened. And two of the people who flipped were an enemy and a skeptic. Paul had been hunting Christians before he became one. And Jesus' own brother, James, thought he was out of his mind until he didn't. That's a whole other video. Now, I promise you honesty, so here it is. None of this proves a resurrection. Serious skeptics have real answers. Grief hallucinations. Cognitive dissonance rewriting a failed hope. Stories growing in the retelling. The agnostic scholar Bart Ehrman grants that the disciples truly believed they saw Jesus alive. He just thinks they were visions. That's a serious position, and you should hear it. But here's what doesn't go away, no matter which side you land on. Something turned a group of terrified men who abandoned their teacher into people who would not stop talking about him, even with a sword at their throat. That transformation is about as close to a historical fact as this era gives us. The only real argument is over what caused it. So if you want to go deeper, and I hope you do, look up the names the scholars fight over. Habermas, right? Ehrman on the other side. Read the actual arguments, not the thumbnails. Because you don't have to believe they were right. But you do have to explain how 12 cowards became 11 martyrs. Every answer to that costs you something. Just make sure you actually pick one. If this got in your head a little good, that's the channel. Stick around, and I'll see you in the next one.